You know, we love documentaries here at BFD, but how far have they come over the years and where are they going? Let's find out. Documentaries are awesome and they're important because they allow us into other people's lives and allow us to walk a few miles in their shoes, but they're also more important and relevant than ever, or are they? We're about to find out. With me is first-time film director of Beauty is Embarrassing, Neil Berkley. Thanks for joining us. And two-time Oscar-winning director and veteran documentary film director, Mark Harris, who's also the head of the documentary program at the USC Film School. Thank you so much for joining us. So the first question off the top is what I mentioned earlier, is documentaries, are they more or less relevant than they were, say, 10, 15, 50 years ago?
I think documentaries have always been relevant. But right now there are many more venues for them than there were when I started out. When I started out, documentaries were on television mainly. There were few documentaries that were theatrical documentaries. I'm a member of the Academy. This year we had 126 entries for Best Feature-Length Documentary. That's 126 films that were shown theatrically at least 1 week in New York and 1 week in Los Angeles. That's a huge number of films.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think relevant. They're always relevant. People have been saying it for decades and decades. There's no excuse not to make a movie, but there's really absolutely no excuse. And this kind of storytelling is so natural. We all know someone interesting. We all can find a story that's interesting.
Yeah, the other thing is I think that as feature films have become more and more divorced from reality, more and more comic book films, I think there's a hunger on the part of audiences to see the real things. You know, documentaries take you to Afghanistan, to take you to Iraq. They take you to places where the news networks don't take you anymore. And certainly feature films don't take you. Documentaries are always like the first to the battlefield. Feature films, you know, come much later usually.
How has the art form changed in the course of the last 50 or 75 years? Has it become more subjective? Have we seen directors sort of enter into the films more often than not? How's it sort of shifted gears?
A little bit. There's definitely a lot more of that. There is that rock star director persona that some people play these days.
Michael Moore.
Exactly, yeah. Morgan Spurlock. There's guys that are in their movies and they're almost the star of the show, which is something that's great, and there's a place for that. Something I've sort of fought against. When I cut a movie, I really try and keep myself out of it and try and just tell that story.
But there are also, I think there are a lot more autobiographical films. I know a lot of my students do autobiographical films about their family, suicide in the family, abuse. It's a form of personal expression. And you know, there is a change in filmmaking which has to do with the technology. The lightweight, portable equipment, digital editing has made it really possible for little money to make a film. It's democratized the medium. So more and more people make films, about themselves, sometimes reluctantly, and then they gradually realize it's their personal voice that's what's important. I also think the other thing is that CGI, animation are all part of documentaries now. They're not just part of feature filmmaking. And they've revolutionized the medium as well, aesthetically. I think so many more possibilities.
In a similar vein, do you think that documentaries can maintain a certain degree of objectivity, or is it pretty much a fairly subjective art form?
I don't think documentaries ever were meant to be objective. They always reflected the point of view of the filmmaker. The idea that there is a kind of objective reality, that's the truth, I just think that's nonsense.
What do you think, Neil?
I totally agree. I mean, someone is physically putting that together, and they have a mind and a brain and a thought process, and they're going to not manipulate it, but put it together in a certain way. There's that idea in science, you can't test something or experiment without affecting it or changing it. And I think that's true in any storytelling. It's coming out of this person's head.
Along those same veins, when it comes to advocacy within a documentary, that documentaries could sort of, we touched on this earlier, they could sort of exist and have other sort of extrapolations of themselves online these days. I mean, you could sort of have a version of it and a continuing story be told on different platforms because of the technology available. So it almost changes the very art form itself, doesn't it? Because it's never really ending in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we were just talking. I'm working on a project right now, and we shot 400 hours of video, and the thought process is we can't count on a theatrical release or a TV buy or anything. So what can we do with all of this content, this material, to keep telling stories, keep telling this story in a different way and make it available to as many people as possible?
So how are you doing that? Are you giving out like smaller portions of it, doling it out, and shorter content?
I mean, the goal for this is to build a place probably online where fans and consumers and people that want to see this story can get as much of it as they can. Still make it interesting, still have this movie that exists, but to make it available, to make it a place where people can go and get as much of it as they can.
It's interesting thinking about that in terms of you've done, you mentioned this new project, but you've also done, a documentary about this artist and puppeteer. So how is it that you come to decide on a given subject, or how does that subject find you?
I approached that question very humbly. I've made one movie, and and that guy I met 12 years ago and decided then and there I'm going to do something with this person, and then luckily 9 years later, all the stars aligned and it worked out and I got to do it. I had to do it. I had to tell this guy's story because I thought he was important. That's what it is, just this need to tell the world who this person was and what he had done.
And for you, how do you jump around from the Holocaust to trees to autism?
There's certain subjects that have resonance for you. And documentary films are really hard to make. They take a long time. So you have to have some kind of personal stake in it. I mean, I got involved in the autism project because of autism in my own family and because I wanted to learn more about it. You're influenced by the era in which you're living and the 60s, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and Vietnam War. And that really, I think, had a big impact on the kinds of films that I chose. And then as you get older, you're interested in different things. But I think the thing that really constantly draws me is sort of a sense of curiosity, and also an interest in social justice. I think that those two things inform my choice of films.
Speaking about influences and the period in which you sort of came up, what are some documentaries that inspired you, that you guys saw and said, I want to do that? And what are some documentaries maybe that are the same or different that you would recommend to aspiring documentarians out there to watch?
Yeah.
Well, I'm sort of in a moment right now because I'm in this. When I was asked that question last week, I thought, what's the answer? And just right now, what I'm really turned on by is, I love documentaries that are about big things that had big impacts, but it's a moment in time. Like I think Gimme Shelter is an amazing movie because it's about these people that had an impact over 60 years, but it's just this one little moment in their lives. Like Don't Look Back is the similar idea. It's this moment in time, and I love that idea because that's kind of what I'm doing right now. We kind of we danced around it, but what is it specifically about documentaries that can affect change, whether it's personal change or social change? What is it specifically about this medium that is different than, say, a narrative film or a book?
And I think, all films and books can change you, but I think the fact that this is real and you know that it's real is really important. And I think you're making films about real life people, and casting is essential in documentary films. And you have to cast the film with characters that the camera loves. And often these are people who've done extraordinary things,
Yeah, I think that it's just that it's real. It really happened. I mean, a great example is last year, The Invisible War. As soon as the military saw that movie, they caused change. That movie made things happen because it was real. If it was a narrative feature, who knows? They may have said, there's a writer, there's someone in a room creating that story, but these women actually went through that event and are still going through it. And for that to actually cause change, it's because it's real. These are real people that you could go meet right now and talk to about their story. But here it is being told in the most powerful of mediums,
Right.
Movies. It really is.
Look at Inconvenient Truth.
Mm-hmm.
It took basically Al Gore in a slideshow, but it was Al Gore's character, and we saw him in a different light, and it presented an issue at a time the American public was really interested in that.
So where do you see the sort of future of documentary filmmaking in, say, 10, 15 years? I mean, obviously, technology is going to be a part of it, as we are sort of talking about right now, but where do you see it going?
Well, having just gone through it, I think the thing I actually get very excited about is how movies are released and consumed. I just went through the process, and it was a very traditional process, and I think that is going to get turned on its ear. I think the idea of theatrical release is going to change. I think how filmmakers approach the festival run is going to change. I think how and when they release movies. I think releasing things as quickly as possible to as many people as possible on as many platforms as possible is what people are going to do.
Absolutely. I have a new film coming out that I'm executive producing called Spirit of the Marathon 2. In the model we're using, we open it one night only to 600 theaters around the country. It's distributed digitally by satellite. No print advertising, it's all through the internet. We use this at our first, the first Spirit of the Marathon. We grossed over $1 million in 2 nights, which is really great for a documentary theatrically. And then it's followed by television release, DVD released, iTunes. So it's video on demand. There are just a whole plethora of platforms now. And I think the old traditional model of opening it 1 week in New York and getting reviews, and if the reviews are good, opening in other cities. That's that model.
Painful.
That's painful, and most documentaries did not do well in the theaters. Only a few would break the $1 million mark. Films like Inconvenient Truth, Michael Moore, but most films would gross less than $100,000. So that model is broken. And I think today we're looking for new venues. The challenge is to get the film to the audience that wants to see it, and to the audience to whom that film is relevant. Because not all films are relevant to all people. So you can't use the kind of mass marketing technique. You have to sort of look to get it to a niche market sometimes.
In terms of casting the character of Al Gore, where it's like you're using these sort of narrative ways of understanding film, but it's like, well, Al Gore's Al Gore, right? And casting is not something. It's like these people are these people, Crumb is Crumb.
Crumb is Crumb, but Al Gore, in An Inconvenient Truth, Davis's great skill was in humanizing him. We had seen Al Gore as this stiff vice presidential candidate, and also seen him as a loser. Now we see him lugging his own suitcases through the airport. It gives you a whole different perspective, and he's talking about his family, he's talking about growing up, and so it's seeing Al Gore in a different light.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's like you were saying about this is subjective. Like the filmmakers that made Crumb, there was a lot of people they could have talked to about who Crumb was, but they talked to his brothers, and they talked to his mother. Like they said, okay, here's where the interesting story is. This really tells us who this guy is. Now his agent or his publisher or whoever else they could have spoke to, like they moved the camera over here. And that's casting, that's deciding which players are important.
And also, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it with Darfur Now, in a lot of ways, if you cast Don Cheadle in it and George Clooney, you're gonna bring that out to a broader audience, and you're gonna introduce people, open their eyes up to it. I mean, just watching those scenes where it's Clooney going around Egypt and, in China and elsewhere and doing these things, it's like, I think Don Cheadle says at one point, it's like, it's sad that this is the top level envoy, diplomatic envoy regarding this issue from our country.
There was a scene in the film that unfortunately never made it to the final film, where Don Cheadle and George are going to Egypt, and the car pulls up and all these young women are screaming, and Don Cheadle kind of looks at George and says, oh my God, this is for you, not for me.
Right.
And it's like, you're here, and they don't care about the issue, it's just about George Clooney. It was very funny. Unfortunately, we didn't make the final film because it wasn't kind of relevant to the storyline. And sometimes there's scenes that stay and stay and stay until like the very final moment. And when you gotta abandon your precious babies often. The great thing about DVDs now is some of these can be DVD extras.
So it's sort of a consolation prize, right?
Yeah.
But the hardest part is dropping characters. When we did In the Arms of Strangers, we filmed 22 people, and we came back and we spent 4 days. We looked at all the footage, and we realized that the film could not hold 22 people, and so we decided to cut with. We dropped 6 characters,
Wow.
and then people tell you their life stories. They can, and it's very hard afterwards to call them up and say, "Listen, we couldn't, fit you in the film."
And so finding those tiny moments, is it something that you're hyper aware of while you're shooting, where you think, oh, that's going to be a great B-roll moment, or is it something that that comes in the editing bay more often than not?
Well, I just strongly believe that it's always better to show something than to tell something. To have someone say, this is what's happening right now, it's better to show them. Someone could say Al Gore is a very normal person. He's like us, he carries his bags. But let's show him carrying his bags and let the audience is smarter than anyone thinks. They'll get that. And when they see that, they'll react to it internally. So I really believe in showing things. So when you see those moments, yeah, you grab them.
Film finally is a visual medium. And for me, the great moments in films are the moments where there is a discrepancy between what people say and their nonverbal behavior. And it's that tension between what they're saying and what they're really feeling is incredibly cinematic for me.
And it's true too. That in your movie, that was one of the more powerful moments when Wayne's dad is watching him, at either a book signing or some sort of presentation, and he's just welling up, and then Wayne says, yeah, it's my whole life my dad has been sort of closed off to me, and when he sees me in these moments performing or signing things, it's like he loses it, and suddenly the veil is sort of dropped, and he sees a real emotion, and he doesn't say anything in that take. I mean, his dad himself, but you see him sort of actively, showing that emotion, and it's powerful stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the best pieces of advice I got was, I think I was saying, boy, it was lucky something happened. And one of the guys I was working with said, hey, there's no luck here. And he was very strong in saying that, very adamant. And he said, things are going to happen whether you're there or not. But someone needs to know to pick up a camera and push that button and train that lens on the thing that's happening. Carrying the bags, his dad crying. Someone had to say, that's happening and it's important to my story. So there's really no luck involved. You have to go get it. And that was one of those moments where Wayne at one point had said, boy, my dad cries at these things. So we had to know to be prepared for that.
So Mark, what was it like getting your first film made, and how was it seen, and how has it changed from then to now?
The first film I made of any substance was a film called Huelga, and it was about Cesar Chavez and the grape strike. I was working for some television stations in the Pacific Northwest, and I was researching a film about the Wobblies. I was interested in farm labor. I heard about the strike. I was just really a kid. I flew down to Delano. I remember going to the office of the National Farm Workers Association and meeting Cesar Chavez and saying, I want to make a film about you. I think what's happening here is important. And he said, okay. I mean, kind of amazingly. I went and made that film, and it was very difficult. I learned a lot about making films on that film. Luckily, the first cut was not so good. I was able to go back and get material that I needed to make it work. Now, the new film that I'm just finishing, we're going to distribute it theatrically, this new model, 600 theaters on one night, and we're also going to then try to sell it to television, DVD, international. We're going to sell it internationally. It was filmed in Rome. We've already have, television distribution in Italy. So,
and that's all happening sort of somewhat concurrent? I mean, right at the same time?
All concurrent. I mean, it will, so many more platforms. And as, time went on, a lot of the films that I did, I also did books as well, because you get so much material, especially in historical films, you get more material that you can fit into 2 hours. So then we take some of this material and publish a book as well, a companion volume to it. So the opportunities really for multi-platform distribution is much greater now.
And you shot that movie on film, right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine. We talked about that earlier before we came in, that, you know, I shot 400 hours in 4 weeks, and he shot, what, 25 to 1?
Right, on film, right. Yes, and that was a lot. And, you know, the people at that time said, why are you shooting so much film? You know, because we would go out, you know, to the picket lines and we would film and we wouldn't know whether people, you know, were going to come out of the fields or not. You know, we were fortunate. And hey, let me just say one thing. That was the first film that I did. I didn't know very much about filmmaking, but it turned out to be a really important event, an important subject. Cesar Chavez became, you know, an important labor figure. And the lesson I learned from that, and I learned many lessons, but one of the primary ones is pick your subjects carefully, you know. And that film has had a long life. It's still being shown. And it became a historical moment that we were able to document. And I think that's really, you know, important, your choice of subjects, because you spend a year or 2 years, you really have to care about the subjects you're making a film about.
What about you, Neil? What about your experience in your first film and only film so far?
Yeah. Well, I said I can't imagine, well, having to shoot with film, because to me it'd be a luxury. It'd be a decision I made as an accent to what I was doing. Let's shoot some film, and that'll be cool. Shooting film, but now I feel like I can go out and get a camera. I can follow someone around. I can cut something together. And no matter what, I can put it on the internet and somebody will see it, you know, whereas back then, maybe just friends and family, who knows? So no matter what, the opportunity to show someone your work these days is so much greater and so much available. And that's the biggest change, is we all have access to cameras and computers and technology. We can all go do this. Of course, there's this, hopefully, skill and talent that comes into, and a great subject and an interesting story. But that's the big difference, is everyone has a chance, an opportunity to put their movie out and get people to watch it somehow. So filmmakers have to be filmmakers. They have to be social media marketers. They have to be distributors. They have to be, from day one, my advice to anyone is the day you decide to make a movie, set all that up and start telling people about it, telling people you're doing this and letting them see things and create this culture, this community around it.
Mark, what advice would you give documentarians out there, aspiring ones?
Really go after what you really strongly feel. One other thing we didn't mention is now we have, you know, ability to raise money through social media, like Kickstarter campaigns. And so you have something, you put together a 5-minute film, you can suddenly go out and raise money from people who you would never otherwise be able to reach, and raise the money for your film. You know, I think the two things for me as a documentary filmmaker, the two most important things are, well, maybe there are three: curiosity, empathy, and, you know, the passion for the subject. I think.
Yeah, energy.
Energy as well, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of time.
Cool, that was great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
That was fun.